My brother laughed at me for inheriting a lame ox from my father. A year later, everyone was left speechless. I never thought a rickety old shack and a peculiar bull would change my life forever. Standing there on that crisp autumn morning in Montana, staring at what my adoptive father had left me in his will, I couldn't help but feel a mix of confusion and disappointment. The wooden structure barely stood against the mountain backdrop, its weathered panels telling stories of decades gone by. The bull, a massive creature with unusual markings and intelligent eyes, watched me from its pen with an unsettling intensity. "Well, Nathan, it's not exactly a mansion in Beverly Hills, but it's something," Sarah said, placing her hand on my shoulder. Her presence was comforting, as it had been since our college days. She had driven 6 hours from Seattle just to be here for the will reading, proving once again why she was my closest friend. The lawyer, Mr. Thompson, cleared his throat behind us. "Mr. Rivers, there are some additional documents you need to sign." He shuffled through his briefcase, pulling out a stack of papers. "Your father was particular about how this property should be handled." I turned to face him, catching a glimpse of Sarah's puzzled expression. There was something in Mr. Thompson's tone that suggested he knew more than he was letting on. My adoptive father, James Rivers, had always been a practical man, a high school science teacher who believed in the value of education and hard work. This inheritance seemed out of character for him. "Did he ever mention why he bought this place?" I asked, taking the papers from Mr. Thompson's hands. The property deed showed the purchase date was just 2 years ago, shortly after he retired. "I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to discuss that," Mr. Thompson replied, his professional demeanor masking whatever knowledge he held. "But he left this envelope for you as well. His instructions were very specific. You're to open it only after spending at least 1 night in the cabin." The envelope felt heavy in my hands, made of thick, expensive paper that seemed at odds with the humble surroundings. The bull let out a low bellow, drawing my attention back to it. There was something different about this animal. Its coat had an unusual sheen, and its muscles seemed more defined than any bull I'd ever seen. Sarah walked over to the pen, studying the creature with her trained veterinarian's eye. "Nathan, this isn't just any bull. Look at its bone structure, the muscle definition. I've never seen anything like it." I joined her at the fence, and the bull approached us slowly, deliberately. Its eyes were what struck me most. There was an awareness there that seemed almost human. The animal lowered its head, allowing Sarah to touch it gently. "Your father was a science teacher," Sarah mused, running her hand along the bull's neck. "Maybe he was conducting some kind of research out here." The thought had crossed my mind, but it didn't add up. James had taught basic biology and chemistry to high school students for 30 years. What kind of research would he be doing with a bull in a remote Montana cabin? "There's only one way to find out," I said, holding up the envelope. "We need to stay the night." Sarah's eyes lit up with excitement. "I'll call the clinic and tell them I'm taking a few days off. Something tells me we're going to need more than just 1 night to figure this out." As Mr. Thompson drove away in his polished sedan, leaving us alone with the mysterious inheritance, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of something much bigger than a simple property transfer. The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the property, and the old cabin seemed to hold its secrets closer. "Let's check out the inside," Sarah suggested, already moving toward the door. "If we're staying the night, we should at least make sure it's habitable." The cabin's door creaked open, revealing an interior that was surprisingly well-maintained compared to its external appearance. A thick layer of dust covered everything, but the furniture was solid and practical. A wooden table, 4 chairs, a small kitchenette, and 2 doors leading to what I assumed were bedrooms. "Look at this," Sarah called out, pointing to a series of photographs on the wall. They showed James at various ages, always in different scientific settings: laboratories, research facilities, universities. In each one he wore the same focused expression I remembered from my childhood, when he would spend hours grading papers at our dining room table. "I never knew about any of this," I admitted, studying the photos closely. "He never talked about working anywhere but Highland High School." Sarah was already exploring further into the cabin, opening drawers and cabinets with methodical precision. "Nathan, come here," she called from one of the bedrooms. "You need to see this." I found her standing in front of an old desk, holding what looked like a journal. "It was hidden in a false bottom drawer," she explained, carefully opening the worn leather cover. "And it's not your father's handwriting." The journal's pages were filled with complex chemical formulas and biological diagrams, along with notes written in a neat, unfamiliar script. The dates at the top of each page went back nearly 30 years, around the time I was adopted. Why would a high school science teacher have this? Sarah wondered aloud, carefully turning the pages. These are advanced genetic research notes. This is way beyond anything taught in high school. Before I could respond, a loud sound from outside caught our attention. The bull was bellowing again, but this time it sounded different, almost like a warning. We rushed to the window just in time to see a figure disappearing into the trees at the edge of the property. "Someone's watching us," Sarah whispered, her hand gripping my arm tightly. The sun had almost completely set now, and the Montana wilderness suddenly felt very dark and very vast. The bull's strange cry echoed across the property once more, and I realized that this inheritance was far more than just a final gift from my adoptive father. It was the beginning of a mystery that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my life. "We need to read that envelope," Sarah said firmly. "Tonight." I nodded, feeling the weight of the envelope in my pocket. Whatever secrets this place held, whatever reason James had for leaving it to me, we were about to find out. The bull watched us from its pen, its intelligent eyes reflecting the last rays of sunlight, as if it too was waiting for the truth to emerge. The night settled around us like a heavy blanket as Sarah and I sat at the old wooden table, the envelope between us untouched. The cabin's ancient generator hummed outside, providing just enough electricity to power a single lamp that cast long shadows across the room. The bull's occasional sounds from outside served as a reminder that we weren't entirely alone in this remote location. "Are you going to open it?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between us. Her usually confident voice carried a hint of uncertainty. My fingers traced the edges of the envelope. "What if it changes everything, Sarah? What if there are things about James that I'm not ready to know?" She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Whatever's in there, we'll face it together. We always have." With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. Inside, I found several documents and a handwritten letter. The paper was yellowed with age, and the handwriting wasn't James's familiar scrawl. Instead, it was the same neat script we'd seen in the journal. "Dear Nathan," I read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper, "if you're reading this, you've inherited the property and Genesis." "Genesis?" Sarah interrupted. "Must be the bull," I replied, continuing to read. "What I'm about to tell you will be difficult to process, but you deserve to know the truth. Your adoption wasn't a coincidence. James was more than just a high school teacher. He was my research partner and closest friend." My hands started shaking more violently, and Sarah moved her chair closer to mine, her presence anchoring me as I read on. "Your biological parents, your mother Claire and I, were genetic researchers working on breakthrough cellular regeneration technology. What we discovered could revolutionize medicine, but it also attracted unwanted attention. James promised to protect both you and our research until you were ready to know the truth." The letter continued, revealing that my best friend since childhood, Michael Anderson, wasn't just a coincidence in my life either. He was my biological brother, separated from me for protection when we were infants. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "Michael is my brother." I looked at Sarah in disbelief. "How is that possible? We've been friends since elementary school." "James must have orchestrated it," Sarah said softly. "Kept you close without revealing the truth." The rest of the letter detailed the location of a hidden laboratory beneath the cabin, accessible through a concealed entrance in the root cellar. Genesis, the bull, was apparently the successful result of their genetic research, a creature with enhanced cellular regeneration capabilities that could revolutionize both medicine and agriculture. "There's more," I said, pulling out a small key attached to the final page. "Coordinates and instructions for accessing the lab." Sarah was already on her feet, her scientific curiosity evident in her expression. "We need to find that cellar entrance." The floorboards creaked beneath us as we searched the cabin, eventually locating a trapdoor hidden under an old rug. The key fit perfectly into a lock that looked far more modern than anything else in the cabin. As we descended the stairs into the darkness, our flashlights revealed walls of stainless steel, a stark contrast to the rustic cabin above. The laboratory was like stepping into another world. Advanced equipment, though covered in dust, lined the walls. Refrigeration units hummed softly, still running after all these years. "This is incredible," Sarah breathed, running her fingers along a row of research journals. These machines, they're state-of-the-art, even by today's standards. I found myself drawn to a desk in the corner where a framed photograph caught my attention. It showed 4 people. James, looking much younger, standing beside a woman and man who shared my features, and another man I recognized as Michael's adoptive father. They planned everything, I murmured, studying the faces of my biological parents. They kept us safe by keeping us separate but close. A loud thud from upstairs made us both freeze. Footsteps moved across the cabin floor above us, and then a familiar voice called out, "Nathan, are you down there?" It was Michael. Sarah and I exchanged glances. How had he known where to find us? And more importantly, what did he know about our shared past? "We should go up," Sarah suggested gently. "He deserves to know too." My heart pounded as we climbed the stairs back to the cabin. Michael stood in the middle of the room holding a letter of his own. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking just as mine had been earlier. "I got this in the mail yesterday," he said, his voice unsteady. "It said to come here tonight, that you'd have answers." He held up his letter, identical to mine. "Tell me it's not true, Nathan. Tell me we haven't been living a lie our entire lives." The bull's distinctive bellow echoed through the night, as if acknowledging the moment our world shifted on its axis. Standing there, facing my lifelong friend, my brother, I realized that the inheritance James had left me wasn't just a cabin and a bull. It was the truth about who I was, where I came from, and why everything in my life had happened the way it did. The question now was, what were we going to do with that truth? The silence that followed Michael's question was deafening. The cabin seemed to close in around us, the weight of our newfound connection pressing down on our shoulders. I looked at Michael, really looked at him, and for the first time I saw the similarities I'd overlooked for years. The shape of his eyes, the set of his jaw. It was like looking in a mirror, yet seeing a stranger at the same time. "It's true," I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "We're brothers, Michael. Biological brothers." Michael's face contorted with a mix of emotions, shock, disbelief, anger, and something that looked almost like relief. He stumbled backward, bracing himself against the wall. "How long have you known?" he demanded, his eyes darting between Sarah and me. "We just found out tonight," Sarah interjected, her calm voice a stark contrast to the tension in the room. "Nathan only opened the letter a few hours ago." Michael ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd seen him do countless times when we were studying for exams or facing difficult decisions. It was strange how familiar and foreign he seemed all at once. "I need some air," he muttered, pushing past us and out the cabin door. I moved to follow him, but Sarah caught my arm. "Give him a moment," she advised. "This is a lot to process." We watched through the window as Michael paced in front of the bull's pen. Genesis, seeming to sense the turmoil, moved closer to the fence, its intelligent eyes following Michael's movements. "I should go talk to him," I said after a few minutes had passed. Sarah nodded, squeezing my hand reassuringly. "I'll start going through some of the research documents we found. There's got to be more to this story." The cool night air hit me as I stepped outside. Michael had stopped pacing and was now leaning against the fence, his forehead resting on his arms. Genesis stood nearby, unusually still and attentive. "Hey," I said softly, approaching cautiously. Michael lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed. 28 years, Nathan. We've known each other for 28 years and we never knew. How is that possible?" I leaned against the fence next to him, our shoulders almost touching. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I do know that finding out you're my brother, it doesn't change how I feel about you. You've always been family to me, Mike." He turned to look at me then, a glimmer of our old camaraderie shining through the confusion. "Remember when we were 10, and we made that blood-brother pact?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Yeah, we used a safety pin and everything. Our moms were furious." "Guess we didn't need the safety pin after all," Michael said, a small smile tugging at his lips. We stood in companionable silence for a while, watching as the stars emerged in the clear Montana sky. Genesis moved closer, huffing softly as if trying to comfort us. "What do we do now?" Michael finally asked. Before I could answer, Sarah's voice rang out from the cabin. "Guys, you need to see this." We hurried back inside to find Sarah hunched over a stack of papers, her eyes wide with excitement. "I've been going through these research notes," she said, barely looking up as we entered. "What your parents were working on, it's incredible. The potential applications are enormous." "What kind of applications?" I asked, peering over her shoulder at the complex diagrams and formulas. Sarah's eyes sparkled with the fervor of scientific discovery. "Cellular regeneration on a scale we've never seen before. Imagine being able to regrow damaged organs, accelerate healing processes, even potentially slow down aging." Michael, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up. "Is that what Genesis is? Some kind of test subject?" Sarah nodded. "From what I can gather, yes. He's the successful result of their experiments, a living proof of concept." The implications of what she was saying began to sink in. Our parents hadn't just been ordinary researchers, they had been on the verge of a medical breakthrough that could change the world. "But why all the secrecy?" I wondered aloud. "Why separate us? Why hide everything in this remote cabin?" Michael's face darkened. "Because someone else wanted this research. Someone who might have been willing to do anything to get it." The gravity of his words hung in the air. We all knew he was right. Discoveries like this would be priceless, and not everyone would be willing to obtain them through ethical means. Suddenly, Genesis let out a loud, urgent bellow from outside. We rushed to the window to see the bull pacing agitatedly in its pen, its eyes fixed on something in the distance. "There's someone out there," Sarah whispered, pointing to a shadowy figure moving at the edge of the property. My heart began to race. "We need to secure the research," I said, already moving towards the hidden lab entrance. "If someone's after what our parents discovered, we can't let it fall into the wrong hands." Michael nodded, his earlier confusion replaced by determination. "I'll check the perimeter, make sure there's no one else around." As Michael slipped out the back door and I began gathering the most crucial documents from the lab, Sarah kept watch at the window. The weight of our newfound responsibility settled over us like a heavy cloak. We were no longer just two friends and a brother, uncovering a family secret. We were the guardians of a scientific breakthrough that could change the course of human history, and someone out there wanted to take it from us. As I emerged from the lab, arms full of journals and hard drives, I caught Sarah's eye. The look we shared spoke volumes. Whatever came next, we would face it together. The bonds of friendship and family, tested by these revelations, seemed to grow stronger in the face of this new threat. Outside, Genesis's agitated bellows continued, a warning cry echoing through the Montana night. Our peaceful inheritance had just become a battleground, and we were only beginning to understand the forces we were up against. The next morning dawned with a tense stillness. Michael, Sarah, and I had taken turns keeping watch through the night, but our mysterious observer hadn't made another appearance. Genesis had eventually calmed down, though his eyes remained alert, scanning the tree line as if he understood the gravity of our situation. We gathered around the kitchen table, mugs of strong coffee in hand, our eyes heavy with lack of sleep, but minds racing with questions. "So, what's our next move?" Michael asked, breaking the silence. The shock of our newfound relationship had given way to a laser-focused determination I recognized from our college days. Sarah spread out some of the research papers we'd brought up from the lab. "We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with here. The implications of this research they're staggering." I nodded, taking a sip of my coffee. "Agreed. But we also need to figure out who was watching us last night and why our parents went to such lengths to keep all of this hidden." As if on cue, a gentle knock at the door made us all freeze. We exchanged wary glances before I slowly approached the entrance, my heart pounding. I opened the door to find an elderly man standing there, his weathered face creased with a mixture of anxiety and hope. "Nathan Rivers?" he asked, his voice gravelly but kind. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "Who are you?" "My name is Dr. Alan Forrester," he said, his eyes darting past me to take in Sarah and Michael. "I was a colleague of your parents, and I believe I can help you understand what's really going on here." After a tense moment of deliberation, we invited Dr. Forrester inside. As he settled into a chair, his eyes lingered on the research papers spread across the table. "I see you've started to piece things together," he said, a hint of approval in his tone. "Your parents, Claire and Robert, were brilliant scientists. What they discovered, it was beyond anything the world had seen." Doctor Forrester went on to explain that the research wasn't just about cellular regeneration. It was about fundamentally altering the human genome to eradicate disease, extend lifespans, and even enhance human capabilities. Genesis, Sarah interjected. He's more than just an experiment, isn't he? The old scientist nodded. He's the key to everything. Your parents managed to create a stable, living being with enhanced regenerative abilities, but more than that, they discovered a way to potentially transfer those abilities to other living organisms. The implications were staggering. I felt the weight of this knowledge settling on my shoulders. But why all the secrecy? Why separate Michael and me? Dr. Forrester's face darkened. Because there were others who wanted to use this research for less noble purposes. A powerful corporation, Genentech Dynamics, discovered what your parents were working on. They wanted to weaponize the research, to create enhanced soldiers and control the global food supply. Michael leaned forward, his brow furrowed. And our parents refused? They did more than refuse, Dr. Forrester said. They went into hiding, scattered their research, and made sure you boys were protected. James and I helped them disappear. As we absorbed this information, a thought struck me. The person watching us last night, could it have been someone from Genentech? Dr. Forrester nodded grimly. It's likely. They've never stopped searching for your parents' research. And now that you've inherited this property, they must suspect you've discovered something. Sarah, who had been quietly processing everything, suddenly stood up. We need to move Genesis, she declared. If he's as important as you say, we can't risk Genentech getting their hands on him. She's right, Michael agreed. But where could we take a genetically enhanced bull without raising suspicion? As we debated our options, a loud crash from outside interrupted our discussion. We rushed to the window to see a sleek black SUV parked at the edge of the property. Two men in dark suits were approaching the bull's pen. Genentech, Dr. Forrester whispered, his face pale. They're here. In that moment, everything changed. We were no longer just trying to uncover a family secret. We were in a race against a powerful corporation to protect a scientific breakthrough that could change the world. Michael, help me with Genesis, I said, already moving towards the door. Sarah, you and Dr. Forrester gather all the research you can. We need to leave now. As we sprang into action, I caught a glimpse of Genesis in his pen. The bull's eyes met mine, and I swear I saw understanding there. He knew somehow that everything was about to change. With our hearts pounding and adrenaline coursing through our veins, we prepared to flee the only place that had started to feel like home. The peaceful Montana landscape now seemed fraught with danger, and I realized that the inheritance my father had left me was far more than just a piece of land and a mysterious animal. It was a mission, a responsibility, and a chance to finish what our parents had started. As we rushed to escape, I silently vowed to protect their legacy no matter the cost. The sound of car doors slamming echoed across the property. Time was running out, and our adventure was only just beginning. The next few minutes were a blur of frantic activity. Michael and I raced to the bullpen, our hearts pounding in our ears. Genesis, as if sensing the urgency, stood calmly as we approached. How are we going to move him? Michael hissed, eyeing the approaching men nervously. I spotted an old truck parked behind the barn, its bed large enough to transport Genesis. There, I pointed. Help me get him into that truck. To our amazement, Genesis followed our lead without resistance, his hooves clattering on the metal ramp we hastily put in place. As Michael secured the tailgate, I glanced back at the cabin. Sarah and Dr. Forrester were emerging, arms full of research materials. Hurry, I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The men from Genentech were getting closer, their purposeful strides eating up the distance between us. I could see the glint of something metallic in their hands. Were those tranquilizer guns? Sarah and Dr. Forrester piled into the cab of the truck, research papers spilling onto the floor. I jumped into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys I'd found hanging in the kitchen. Come on, I muttered, willing the old engine to start. Just as the first man reached the bullpen, the truck roared to life. I slammed it into gear and we lurched forward, tires spitting gravel. In the rearview mirror, I saw the men running back to their SUV. They're following us, Michael said, his voice tense. We sped down the dirt road leading away from the property, the Montana landscape blurring past us. Genesis swayed in the back, but remained surprisingly steady for a bull in a moving vehicle. Where are we going? Sarah asked, clutching a stack of notebooks to her chest. Dr. Forrester spoke up, his voice steady despite the chaos. I have a colleague about 100 miles from here. She has a private research facility where we might be safe, at least temporarily. I nodded, pressing down harder on the accelerator. The old truck groaned in protest but picked up speed. For the next hour we drove in tense silence, constantly checking the rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. The Genentech SUV had fallen behind, but we couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. As we put more distance between us and the cabin, Sarah began sifting through the research materials. "This is incredible," she murmured. "The level of detail, the breakthrough concepts, your parents were geniuses." "But why didn't they publish their findings?" Michael asked. "This could have changed the world." Dr. Forrester sighed heavily. "They were going to, but then they discovered something that made them realize the research was too dangerous to release." "What do you mean?" I asked, glancing at him briefly before returning my eyes to the road. The regenerative properties they unlocked, they weren't just limited to physical healing. They found evidence that it could potentially affect cognitive functions, even alter personality traits. The implications of this sank in slowly. Sarah gasped. "You mean it could change who a person fundamentally is?" Dr. Forrester nodded grimly. "In the wrong hands, this could be used to create a population of controllable, enhanced individuals. Your parents couldn't risk that. The weight of this revelation settled over us like a heavy blanket. Our inheritance wasn't just scientific research, it was a moral dilemma of staggering proportions." As we drove on, the Montana landscape gradually gave way to more populated areas. We needed to find a place to rest and regroup, somewhere we could keep Genesis hidden and plan our next move. "There's a small town coming up," Michael said, studying a map he'd found in the glove compartment. "Maybe we could find a quiet place to lay low for a bit." I nodded, feeling the fatigue of our escape settling into my bones. As we approached the town, a small motel on the outskirts caught my eye. Its adjacent field, obscured from the main road, seemed perfect for concealing our unusual cargo. We pulled into the motel, the gravel crunching under our tires. The neon vacancy sign flickered weakly in the gathering dusk. "I'll get us some rooms," Sarah offered, climbing out of the truck. As we waited, I turned to Dr. Forrester. "There's something I don't understand. If our parents went into hiding, how did James end up with the cabin in Genesis?" The old scientist's eyes clouded with emotion. "James was more than just your adoptive father, Nathan. He was the ethical compass of the research team. When your parents realized the potential dangers of their work, it was James who suggested the plan to protect both you boys and the research." This new piece of information made my head spin. James, the man who had raised me, had been at the center of this all along. I felt a renewed sense of loss, wishing I could talk to him one last time. Sarah returned with 2 room keys, interrupting my thoughts. "I told the manager we're on a road trip with our pet bull," she said with a wry smile. "He didn't even blink. I guess they've seen stranger things around here." As we settled Genesis into the field and carried our belongings and the precious research materials into the motel rooms, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of our journey. Later that night, as we gathered in one of the rooms to discuss our next steps, I looked around at the faces of my companions. My newfound brother, my best friend, a scientist connected to my past and a genetically enhanced bull just outside. We were an unlikely team, thrust together by circumstances beyond our control. But as we pored over the research, debating the ethical implications and the potential risks, I realized that we were now the guardians of a scientific breakthrough that could reshape the world. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the potential to do good. As the night wore on and plans began to take shape, one thing became clear. Our lives would never be the same again. The inheritance James had left us was far more than just property and research. It was a chance to make a difference, to protect a secret that could change everything. With Genentech on our trail and the weight of this knowledge on our shoulders, we knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger. But as I looked at Michael, Sarah, and Dr. Forrester, I felt a surge of determination. Whatever came next, we would face it together. The pale light of dawn crept through the motel room's thin curtains, finding us still huddled around a table strewn with papers and laptops. We had spent the night poring over the research, each new discovery adding layers to the already complex situation we found ourselves in. Sarah rubbed her tired eyes, pushing back from the table. "Guys, I think I've found something important." We all leaned in as she pointed to a series of complex formulas and genetic sequences. These notations here, they're not just about genesis. I think your parents were working on applying the regenerative properties to human subjects. Dr. Forrester nodded solemnly. They were. In fact, they had reached a stage where human trials were the next logical step. A chill ran down my spine. Human trials? Are you saying they actually tested this on people? The old scientist's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of pride and concern. They did, Nathan. On themselves and on you and Michael. The room fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. Michael was the first to break the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. Are you telling us that we're enhanced? Dr. Forrester nodded slowly. Your parents wanted to ensure that their children would be protected no matter what happened. The enhancements are subtle, slightly improved healing, resistance to disease, potentially increased longevity. Nothing that would be immediately noticeable. I felt as if the floor had dropped out from under me. All these years I had carried within me a secret I didn't even know existed. Is that why you separated us? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. To hide the evidence of the experiments? Partly, Dr. Forrester admitted, but it was also to protect you. If you were together, it might have been easier for someone to connect the dots. Sarah, ever the voice of reason, steered us back to the matter at hand. This changes things. If Genentech figures out that you two are living proof of the research's success, they'll stop at nothing to get to you. As if on cue, a commotion outside caught our attention. Through the window, we saw a black SUV pulling into the motel parking lot. Two men in suits stepped out, showing photos to the motel manager. They've found us, Michael hissed, already moving to gather our belongings. We sprang into action, quickly packing up the research materials. What about Genesis? Sarah asked, glancing towards the field where the bull was grazing peacefully. I made a split-second decision. We can't move him without drawing attention. We'll have to leave him here for now. Dr. Forrester nodded in agreement. I have an old colleague who lives nearby. He can retrieve Genesis and keep him safe until we can regroup. As we slipped out the back of the motel room, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt at leaving Genesis behind. The bull had become more than just an experiment to me. He was a living link to my biological parents and the incredible work they had done. We piled into the old truck, our hearts pounding as we saw the Genentech agents enter the motel office. As I started the engine, I caught sight of Genesis in the rearview mirror. The bull was watching us, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand the gravity of the situation. We pulled out of the motel as quietly as possible, taking a back road to avoid being seen. As we put distance between us and our pursuers, the adrenaline began to subside, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty about what to do next. We need a plan, Michael said, voicing what we were all thinking. We can't keep running forever. Sarah, who had been studying a map, spoke up. Dr. Forrester, you mentioned a colleague with a private research facility. How far is it? About a day's drive from here, he replied. It's remote, well-equipped, and secure. We could continue our research there and figure out our next steps. I nodded, making the decision. That's where we'll go then. But first we need to make a stop. The others looked at me quizzically as I pulled into a small electronics store in the next town we passed through. We need to protect ourselves, I explained. Burner phones, a laptop we can use without being traced. We're in this for the long haul now. As we gathered our supplies, I couldn't help but reflect on how much our lives had changed in just a few short days. We had gone from ordinary people to fugitives, guardians of a scientific breakthrough that could change the world. Back on the road, with miles of Montana landscape stretching out before us, I glanced at Michael in the passenger seat. My brother. The word still felt strange, but there was comfort in it too. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Sarah's voice broke through my thoughts. I've been thinking, if your parents' research can really do what we think it can, we have a responsibility to see it through. But we also have to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Dr. Forrester nodded gravely. The potential for good is immense, but so is the potential for misuse. We'll need to tread very carefully. As we drove on, the weight of our situation settled over us. We were no longer just uncovering a family secret. We were embarking on a journey that could potentially reshape the future of humanity. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and difficult ethical questions. But as I looked at my companions, My newfound brother, my trusted friend, and a link to my parents' legacy, I felt a surge of determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever choices we would have to make, we would face them together. The Montana sun was setting as we continued our journey, casting long shadows across the landscape. In those lengthening shadows, I saw the silhouette of the path before us, a path that would lead us to truths we couldn't yet imagine, and decisions that would test the very core of who we were. As we approached Dr. Forrester's colleague's research facility, the landscape transformed into a dense forest. The facility, nestled in a clearing, looked more like a high-tech fortress than a scientific institution. Solar panels glinted on the roof, and I could see the faint shimmer of what I suspected were state-of-the-art security systems. Dr. Forrester leaned forward from the back seat. "We're here. Dr. Elena Valdez is expecting us." We pulled up to a heavily secured gate. After a brief exchange over an intercom, the gate slid open silently. As we drove through, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were crossing a threshold into a new chapter of our lives. Dr. Valdez met us at the entrance, a tall, stern-looking woman with streaks of gray in her dark hair. Her eyes, however, sparkled with intelligence and curiosity. "Alan," she greeted Dr. Forrester warmly before turning to us. "Welcome. I've prepared the lab and living quarters for you. We have much to discuss." As we followed her inside, the stark contrast between the facility's exterior and interior struck me. While outside it looked like a fortress, inside it was a haven of scientific pursuit. State-of-the-art equipment lined the walls, and holographic displays flickered with complex data. "This is incredible," Sarah breathed, her eyes wide as she took in the lab. Dr. Valdez smiled, a hint of pride in her expression. "Your parents helped design this place," she said, looking at Michael and me. "It was meant to be a safe haven for their research if things ever went wrong." The mention of our parents sent a pang through my chest. There was still so much we didn't know about them, so many questions left unanswered. "Dr. Valdez," I began, "how much do you know about our parents' work?" She gestured for us to sit around a large conference table. "I know enough to understand why you're here, and the danger you're in. Alan has filled me in on the rest." Over the next few hours, Dr. Valdez and Dr. Forrester walked us through the full scope of our parents' research. The cellular regeneration technology was just the tip of the iceberg. They had been working on ways to enhance human capabilities, cure genetic diseases, and even potentially extend the human lifespan. But the most groundbreaking aspect, Dr. Valdez explained, pulling up a holographic model of a DNA strand, was their discovery of what they called the adaptive gene. The DNA model zoomed in, highlighting a specific sequence. This gene, when activated, allows the body to adapt to extreme conditions and stresses at an unprecedented rate. It's what gives Genesis his remarkable resilience. Michael leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "And you're saying we have this gene too?" Dr. Valdez nodded solemnly. "Yes, but in a dormant state. Your parents wanted to protect you, but they also wanted to give you the choice of whether to activate it or not." The weight of this revelation settled over us. We weren't just carriers of groundbreaking research, we were living embodiments of it. Sarah, ever practical, spoke up. "So what's our next move? We can't hide here forever, and Genentech is still out there looking for us." Dr. Valdez's expression turned grim. "You're right. And there's something else you need to know. Genentech isn't just after the research. They're developing their own version of the adaptive gene technology." This news hit us like a shockwave. The idea of such powerful technology in the hands of a corporation with questionable ethics was terrifying. "We need to stop them," Michael said firmly. I nodded in agreement, but a nagging question remained. How? We are scientists and researchers, not whatever we need to be to take on a powerful corporation. Dr. Valdez smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "That's where the choice comes in. You have the potential to be more than just scientists. If you choose to activate your adaptive genes, you could develop abilities that would help level the playing field." The room fell silent as we absorbed this information. The choice before us was monumental. Remain as we were and fight an uphill battle, or embrace the unknown potential within us and risk changing who we fundamentally were. Sarah reached out and squeezed my hand. "Whatever we decide, we're in this together." As I looked around at my brother, my best friend, and the scientists who had become our allies, I felt a mix of fear and determination. We stood at a crossroads, not just for ourselves, but potentially for the future of humanity. "We need time to think about this," I said finally. "It's not a decision to be made lightly." Dr. IT. Valdez nodded understandingly. "Of course, in the meantime, we'll continue analyzing the research and monitoring Genentech's movements. And don't worry about Genesis. My team retrieved him safely. He's in a secure location nearby." As we were shown to our living quarters, my mind raced with the possibilities and dangers that lay ahead. The inheritance that had seemed like a simple cabin and a unique bull had turned into a world-altering responsibility. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about James, the man who had raised me. He had known all along what Michael and I were, what we could become. He had protected us, guided us, prepared us for this moment without ever revealing the truth. I made a silent promise to honor his memory and the legacy of my biological parents. Whatever path we chose, whatever challenges we faced, we would use this inheritance to make the world better, not worse. As sleep finally began to overtake me, one thought crystallized in my mind. The real journey was just beginning, and the choices we made in the coming days would shape not just our futures, but potentially the future of humanity itself. The next few days at the facility passed in a whirlwind of activity. We immersed ourselves in our parents' research, each new discovery adding layers to the already complex situation we found ourselves in. The more we learned, the more we realized the monumental nature of the decision before us. On the fifth day, as we gathered in the main lab for our daily briefing, Dr. Valdez greeted us with a grave expression. "We've intercepted some troubling information," she said, pulling up a holographic display. "Genentech has accelerated their research. They're close to replicating your parents' work on the adaptive gene." The room fell silent as we absorbed this news. Michael was the first to speak, his voice tight with tension. "How close?" Dr. Valdez sighed. "Too close. Our estimates suggest they could have a working prototype within months." I felt a chill run down my spine. The idea of Genentech wielding such power was terrifying. "What are our options?" I asked, looking around at our small group. Sarah, who had been poring over some data, looked up. I think I might have found a way to safely activate our adaptive genes," she said hesitantly. "But it's risky. We don't know exactly how it will affect us." All eyes turned to Michael and me. The weight of the decision pressed down on us like a physical force. To activate the genes would be to step into the unknown, to fundamentally change who we were. But to do nothing meant risking Genentech gaining an insurmountable advantage. Michael met my gaze, a silent understanding passing between us. "We need to do it," he said softly. "It's what our parents prepared us for." I nodded, feeling a mix of fear and determination. "Sarah, are you sure about this?" She smiled wryly. "As sure as I can be, given the circumstances. I'll be monitoring you both every step of the way." Dr. Forrester, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Remember, this isn't just about stopping Genentech. Your parents believed this technology could change the world for the better. That's the real inheritance they left you." His words struck a chord within me. This wasn't just about us anymore. It was about the future we wanted to create. The next few hours were a blur of preparation. Sarah and Dr. Valdez worked tirelessly to set up the necessary equipment, while Michael and I underwent final medical checks. As I lay on the medical bed, electrodes attached to my skin, I couldn't help but think of Genesis. In a way, we were about to become more like him, living embodiments of our parents' groundbreaking work. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked, her hand hovering over the activation switch. Michael and I exchanged one last look before nodding. "Do it," we said in unison. The moment Sarah flipped the switch, it felt like every cell in my body ignited. A rush of energy coursed through me, bringing with it a kaleidoscope of sensations I couldn't begin to describe. I could hear Michael gasping beside me, knew he was experiencing the same thing. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. I opened my eyes, blinking against the harsh lab lights. Everything seemed sharper somehow. Colors were more vivid, sounds clearer. "How do you feel?" Dr. Valdez asked, her voice a mixture of concern and scientific curiosity. I sat up slowly, marveling at how easy it felt. "Different," I said, struggling to find the right words. "More Alive, I guess. Michael was already on his feet, flexing his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "It's incredible," he breathed. "I can feel everything." Over the next few hours, we underwent a battery of tests. Our physical capabilities had increased dramatically, strength, speed, endurance, all off the charts. But it was the mental changes that were truly astounding. Our ability to process information, to make connections and solve problems, had been enhanced beyond anything we could have imagined. As night fell, we gathered in the facility's common room, still reeling from the day's events. Sarah sat beside me, her hand in mine, a constant reminder of the human connection that grounded us amidst all this change. "So what now?" Michael asked, voicing the question we were all thinking. Dr. Forrester leaned forward, his eyes bright with determination. "Now we take the fight to Genentech. We use your new abilities and your parents' research to stop them and ensure this technology is used for the good of humanity." As we began to plan our next moves, I couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose, unlike anything I'd experienced before. The inheritance James had left us, the cabin, Genesis, the research, had led us to this moment. We were no longer just Nathan and Michael, two ordinary guys thrust into extraordinary circumstances. We were something more now, something with the potential to shape the future. But with that potential came great responsibility. As I looked around at our small group, my brother, my best friend, our mentors, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Outside the facility, the Montana night was alive with stars. Somewhere out there, Genentech was moving forward with their plans, unaware that the game had changed. We were no longer running or hiding. We were preparing to stand and fight for the future our parents had dreamed of. As we continued our discussions late into the night, one thing became clear. Our journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The real adventure, the challenge of using our newfound abilities responsibly, of protecting the world from those who would misuse this technology, of living up to the legacy our parents had left us, that was still to come. But as I sat there, surrounded by the people I trusted most in the world, I felt ready for whatever lay ahead. We had been given an incredible gift, a chance to make a real difference in the world, and we were going to use it. The inheritance that had started with a simple cabin and a unique bull had become something far greater, a mission, a responsibility, and a chance to change the world for the better. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the Montana mountains, I knew that our true journey was just beginning.